Friends, you can have a seat. My name is Mark, and if I haven't met you, I'd like to meet you and meet somebody here on staff on Mission Church. We have Pastor Brandon, who would love to connect with you, our connections pastor. Reese Vines, our worship pastor, is out today on his anniversary date with Emily, his wife, which is so awesome. And they're in Savannah. So, Sammy, thanks for filling in today, and the team and worship band. We can make some noise for Sammy and Gretchen and beyond. Thank you guys for filling in. And we have been walking through a series in Lamentations. I feel like when we're done with Lamentations, you all deserve an award. It's been a journey, right? It's not an easy book. I think it's skipped over a lot of times I'm learning why now. I think a lot of pastors do this in one sermon, and they go like this. They move on to something in the New Testament. Because yes, it's like New Testament's like that when you're treading water for a long time, and then all of a sudden you get closer to the shallow and you feel your toes touched. And all of a sudden, your feet touch, and then you get this rest. That's what I feel like with the New Testament. The Old Testament it can be a challenge to understand what the author was intending. And we've been walking through, if you're new with us, we've been walking through the book of Lamentations. There's 5 chapters, and next week will be our last week in the book of Lamentations as we move on from there. But friends online, I just want to say this to you as well. If you're an atheist, if you're an agnostic, if you don't know what you believe, we have a chair for you here at On Mission Church. And this is a place we want you to ask questions. We love to have a dialogue. And this is part of what I do is being up here, but I love sitting with you and having a discussion about why I believe what I believe and why I have the hope that's in me. And I'd love to hear your story as well. And I speak for all of our staff here at church. I want to make sure we're clear on that. Well, friends, yes, this series is called Redirecting Tears. And the concept behind this is Jeremiah, who wrote this, he's a prophet. He was known as being the weeping prophet. So he was known for weeping. And he had a very, you could say, an obstinate, very difficult church that he was called to lead. In many ways, they wouldn't listen. And they were living in sin. And for 40 years, he said, repent. And this little voice of truth from Jeremiah was ignored. There were other false prophets that were saying other things. It was confusing for the people. And so this idea, this series is to get you and your pain and your weeping. I want you to redirect your tears. Yes, we cry over things that maybe are first world problems. I'm sure you can think of the list. The things that bring us to our knees and make us emotional. I only got 28 likes on this post. End of the world, right? Fetal position. We're game over. We can't do this anymore. I mean, the list is long for us in this culture, what brings us to our knees. But I want you to redirect your tears to what breaks the heart of God. And right now, thinking about Cobb County, thinking about Mableton, Smyrna, and whatever town you're from, so many people, I'll say thousands of people, that don't have the hope of Jesus Christ in this season, getting ready to celebrate him. But they're waking up and they don't know him. They're stuck in sin. Whatever they're stuck in it. They don't know Christ, so they're removed. That should break our hearts. We should weep over that your neighbors don't know Christ, that your family member doesn't know Christ, your coworkers, your classmates if you're in school. That should break our hearts. We should be weeping over those things. Well, friends, last week we were in chapter 3, and chapter 3 is like you're in the darkness in this funeral dirge, and all of a sudden the sun comes up just a little bit. And then also we see this glimmer of hope as Jeremiah says, okay, all of a sudden he goes back, he moves away from what he's seeing because he's seeing destruction everywhere. The Babylonians came in, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, and they destroyed Jerusalem. Fires everywhere. They'd surrounded the city for 18 months, trying to cut off supplies so people were starving. But then we see last week, I love this part, where through the pain and suffering, through the stench of destruction, he could smell it. It was everywhere. But through all of that, he stops his feelings and then he remembers. Remember that? He called to mind what he knew about God. He called it to mind. So disregarding his heart, the feelings, he just remembered that God is faithful. God is faithful, not meaning that every day is going to be bliss. God is faithful that he fulfills his promises. And he said, great is thy faithfulness. God's mercies are new every morning. So we see the sun comes out. It's like we went from like minor chords to all of a sudden this major chord lift, and the sun is out, and then here we are relapsing into chapter 4, back down into the depths of darkness again. All heart, all feelings, everything's bad. Well, friends, we're not going to have the verses on the screen this morning, and encourage you, if you have a Bible, follow along. In poetry, sometimes I think it's appropriate just to listen. If you just want to listen, that's fine. Either way, we're just not going to have it on the screen today because it is a lot, and I want to make sure you can chew this and chew it well and not choke. So I'm going to give this to you in little bites as we move forward. But friends, as I think about this, as I was reading this last week, chapter 4, going through his heart, his emotions, watching his people destroyed, he's weeping because they were sinful and they didn't listen. And now he has double the tears because they're destroyed and they're in exile and Babylonians are in charge and they're in captivity. So there are many reasons for his tears. He could fill buckets with his tears. Well, friends, I just want to stop us just for a minute because it's easy to get into the text and navigate through and walk through what's going on and just to dwell in heart. I want to stop us because sometimes we need to zoom back and see the big picture. Well, this for me is for you parents, you know this. So Westside friends, I have an estrogen empire. So when I go home, it is just pink and purple, and there's hair on walls and in crevices I don't even understand. It's just, everything is girly. That's what I go home to. Even the fish, the guinea pigs, they're all female. I just realized that. It's just, everything is female. I don't know. It's just what God has called me to. But even last night, I was realizing as I did the nightly routine and walking through all their emotions, which every 8 seconds is a different feeling, and this, and she did that, and the pig did this, and we just as parents, we have to walk them through, help them process life. And last night, it was helping, I won't say names today, but one of our 3 littles. And there's one who has this little issue with jealousy, more than the others. And as I was getting ready to tuck her in and have the little nightly routine, she had a lot of emotion and tears because Dad spent more time with the other 2. And they could put their blankets over my head and do a little tickle thing. And I got to her, and she might be the oldest, I don't know. But I got to her and her bunk, and I got up there, and there's emotions. But you let them do the blanket thing, Dad, and the tickle thing. And why with me? I'm like, it's because I'm just done. The day's over, right, parents? If you have littles, you know what I mean. You're on fumes all day pouring out to them, especially on weekends. My wife does this 24/7. I commend you. So, jealousy. We got to the heart of the matter because all there is on the outside is just tears. It's just emotion. Or they come home from school and there's just tears and emotion. And we're trying to articulate what they're saying. We can't understand you because they're just weeping. And last night I was reminded, as there were just tears at the beginning, I finally had to say, why are you crying? As a dad, right? Let's focus this down. What is the core issue? And through the tears and weeping of, okay, we've finally discovered these things that, yes, I did spend more time with the others. But with kids and even with adults, sometimes we need to narrow it down to what is the core issue. Why are we having the emotion we're having? There are these symptoms up here that are visible, but there's some sort of key issue down low that is really the problem. Well, the problem with the friends from Judah was idolatry. That was the number one issue that they had, was idolatry. Well, friends, this morning, this might be a duh thing for you, but I want to show us this idolatry, little definition I enjoy. Idolatry is this: if God is seeking security and meaning in someone or something other than God. And then we got the one thing on there too. So that is the idea behind idolatry. It's just when something else takes that place. And a lot of you know this, but this morning I want to use this as a reminder. Well, friends, we have to go back and understand a little bit more about God. And so I want to rewind back to Exodus chapter 20 to understand the character of God. We have to go back to Exodus. Exodus, as we see the 10 Commandments are given. As Moses goes up, as he's up there on the mountain, Mount Sinai, for 40 days. 40 days. The people are just already all emotional. He's up there. We have leadership. Well, Aaron, can you do this? And what if we melt our jewelry down and we make a golden calf and we form it? Well, up there on the mountain, God, writing this, he wrote the 10 Commandments. The first commandment, you shall not have any other God before me. Well, some people read this, are like, well, what kind of God would say that? Well, I read this, I'm like, no, that's a good reminder for us. He actually has to say that in 2021. We need that reminder. We shouldn't have any other God before him. Maybe this morning you're sitting here saying, no, I don't have any other God before him. He's number one. And if we could examine your heart and to see what maybe gets in place of God, I think you'd answer it in a different way. But the second commandment says, you must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. Now, they seem similar. Okay, God, we kind of get your point. You're being redundant here, God. Why are you saying this? Well, the first commandment has to do with who we worship. It's the who category. And the second commandment is based on the how we worship. See, the Israelites, when they fashioned this golden calf, the idea wasn't to actually worship the golden calf. They wanted a visual representation of Yahweh, the deliverer one, the one who took them out and delivered them from Egypt. And so they were exposed to all this polytheism, these Egyptian gods, and they knew that's kind of a visual thing that they would have. So in their hearts, they're actually trying to worship God, and just how was horrible. They're doing it in the wrong way. They had their how all messed up. So God, friends, is a jealous God. Now, maybe you hear this and you think, well, that means that God is sinning. Well, this is in a different context when it comes to God, when it comes to jealousy. So God cannot sin. So this is not a sin. And there's a difference between envy and jealousy. So to say that God is a jealous God is different than saying he's envious. So just to kind of give you a perspective, to be full of envy is like you are on the bottom of the mountain looking at the top of what you don't have. If you're jealous, you're on the top of the mountain looking down for those who are coming up to probably take what you have. So God is already rightfully having his name, his title, what he's made. So he deserves worship. It's his. It shouldn't be for anyone or anything else. It should be for him. So God is a jealous God. He alone deserves our full focus, and our full worship should be aimed at him. So friends, our one thing for today is this. If God is second place in your life, he has no place in your life. If God is second place in your life, he has no place in your life. We serve a God that does not take a passenger seat. He doesn't take a back seat. That is not his role. He needs to have the wheel. And this morning, as we walk through this, yes, we're going to zoom in a little bit more and see the pain and suffering from Jeremiah, but I want you to walk out of here thinking about yourself and what is it for you that has taken that driver's seat other than God? Because God will not have a back seat. Well, friends, here we go into the emotions, into the fourth chapter of Lamentations, back into the heart, full feelings. We walk through, and it says this, Lamentations chapter 4, verse 1. Jeremiah says, how the gold has lost its luster, the fine gold become dull, the sacred gems are scattered at every street corner. How the precious children of Zion, once worth their weight in gold, are now considered as pots of clay, the work of a potter's hands. So this is his meltdown as he's recording actually what he's seeing. This idea of in the temple, there's all these jewels. Even the priests had some jewels, they think, in their robe that they would wear. He's making a comparison between those jewels, and the people, the special people of Zion, of Jerusalem. The special people were considered like gold, and now they're reduced. They're dull now. They're wandering. They're void of value. And so he compares them to pots of clay, which had very low value. If your pot broke back then, it wasn't really worth it to repair it. You would just make a new one. They were disposable. And Jeremiah is making this connection now with the people, with gold and gems, and also with pottery. And he moves on to verse 3. Even jackals offer their breasts to nurse their young. But my people have become heartless, like ostriches in the desert. What in the world, Jeremiah? What are you talking about? So friends, in the siege of Jerusalem, it turned the once compassionate women, once full of compassion, into selfish creatures. They no longer were selfless for their young. They were selfish. He's making comparisons with animals, how animals have more care. And I didn't know this, but I guess ostriches, one of the most awkward-looking animals on earth. You just look at an ostrich if you're having a bad day, and all of a sudden you have a better day. Just bizarre, but they are really bad parents. I didn't know this. Really bad. I guess their eggs they put their eggs wherever, and sometimes they're just not looking, they crush them, and they just kind of scatter their eggs, and they forgot where they put their eggs. Well, Jeremiah knew this, and he was comparing this with the women there in Jerusalem, the people that are now under captivity, comparing this to them, that they are horrible parents. They've become heartless. He says in verse 4, because of the thirst of the infant's tongue sticks to the roof of its mouth, the children beg for bread, but no one gives it to them. Total destruction, mourning, weeping, pain, devastation. There's a common theme here of shortage of water, shortage of food, shortage of provision. And we saw the last chapter last week. I talked about how Jeremiah mentioned his portion. He said that the Lord is his portion. And you think about that context coming from a very hungry man, a man who's starving. Because the Babylonians, it had been for 18 months, they surrounded the city. So if you can imagine, wherever you live, it's Mapleton, Smyrna, or beyond, if you can imagine for 18 months your supplies are cut off. This means no Amazon, if you can imagine. No boxes at your door with that little text that goes ding, and you have the joy instantly. Nothing, and it gets more severe from there to the point where you look at your neighbor's plump dog in a very different way. You're licking your chops. I know today, here we are sitting in the comfort of Georgia in a beautiful area, and we have all these comforts and luxuries. It's hard for us to recognize what he's going through, but the people were starving. So last week when he said, the Lord is my portion, coming from the massive gurgle you can imagine of his stomach, that says so much more than it would say if it came from me or from us. The Lord is my portion. Culinary terms to kind of enter us into his world. Talking about this, now the kids don't have enough. The kids are suffering, and no one gives them anything. You know, friends, let's look at this in verse 5. Those who once ate delicacies are destitute in the streets. Those brought up in royal purple now lie on ash heaps. In the pain and the suffering and whatever they're going through from the injuries, malnourishment, a lot of people think the only place they could find for comfort if they had bodily issues, if they had sores, were in these ash heaps. The place looked like a landfill. But maybe the most sterile place in a landfill is a thing that's burning and it's warm and it's purified, so they'd sit on it. Kind of like what we saw with Job, if you remember the story of Job, with his boils. And this is a very similar situation. Some people think this actually talks about that there were dung hills. There were just piles of poop and landfills and garbage and just disgusting things everywhere. You can imagine the smell. But he found comfort in the ash heaps because that brought him maybe some sort of better healing, to be by the fire, to be by the warmth, the purity. He says this in verse 6, the punishment of my people is greater than that of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment without a hand turn to help her. He's just kind of saying, hey, they had it a lot easier. It was an instant destruction. 18 months of looking around for food. Kids are not having enough food, suffering for a long time. He's saying they had it so much better because it was quick. It was instant. For us, it's a slow, drawn-out pain. He was jealous, full of jealousy because of how they were destroyed. Well, friends, I want you to skip down to verse 10. It says this, Jeremiah says, with their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children. Let me read this again. With their own hands, compassionate women have cooked their own children. Moms, think about this. This is a true story. Who became their food when my people were destroyed. What kind of suffering does it take for a mom to think, you know what? I'm going to eat my own kid. Now, it's not just the suffering. I think it shows a completely deprived heart in the same image to get to that point where idolatry was reigning, self was glorified, God was in the backseat, if maybe not up on a hill somewhere, to cook their own kids. Well, friends, we should all be disturbed when children are taken advantage of. We should all be concerned when kids take a back seat And a parent's, or specifically a mother's priorities are over the kids' priorities. I think we all get concerned about that. Parents, you understand this. Well, we all hate the stories of child sacrifice. We hate the stories of children going through any kind of harm. And I read this and I think about us today in 2021. We have so many parents that put their career over their children. And the kids just know mom and dad is being married to their career. And we put our kids in front of screens. We say, here you go. And I think, man, who are we to judge them when we have modern day child sacrifice happening here in our culture? We are sacrificing our kids. They don't know their parents. And we wonder why society is going upside down, the family structure is breaking down. I think it goes back to the fracture of selfishness, the sin of idolatry, of self and value, and chasing some other dream instead of pursuing the heart of God. So who are we to blame them? We do the same thing today. Well, friends, Jeremiah, he's highlighting the lowest of lows. I cannot think of anything lower than a mother obviously killing or eating her own kid. Nothing worse than that. And friends, he moves on from there. He says in verse 12, he says, the kings of the earth, this is what Melissa read, the kings of the earth did not believe, nor did any of the peoples of the world, that enemies and foes could enter the gates of Jerusalem. As soon as I read this last week, I thought, how is this like us as the church? As On Mission Church, it's so easy to think, oh, there's no way we could fall. Our leadership, they're so full of integrity. Everybody's so strong spiritually. We're so together. We're so tight. We do this. Well, friends, are you battling in prayer for the leaders of this church? Anything could happen to us. I look at these priests, these people that are in charge of kings, people that had nobility back then, and people thought, okay, they're in a different level. And to see them full of corruption, idolatry, committing so many sins because they thought they were removed and they were set apart in a way where they couldn't be touched. And yet it can happen. Well, friends, I want to encourage you as we read this, as we think about back then, as Israel really is the center of the world today. I really see Israel as the center of the world today, center of history, the origins of history all over there. Some of you have been there. We've been there. It's amazing to be there. But to think for us today, as our church here, I hope we don't think that we are immune. You have all heard church leadership nightmare stories. They run rampant. Media loves to show these stories. You have 1,000 churches doing great things. You get one church that has some sort of corruption from the top. It makes the headlines because people love that. Yes, they're just like us. Hypocrites. Yes, we can justify making fun of them now. Justify making fun of their God because there's no way he can be real. Well, friends, here, even the leadership was corrupt. He says this in verse 13. But it happened because of the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests, who shed within her the blood of the righteous. The priests were taking on this almost like a law enforcement role. They were killing people who they thought maybe deserved it, and they literally had blood on them. And you guys, this sin was so rampant there in Judah, so out of control. I know we look at the destruction, and I know it's sad, and all these things that are horrible to read about, but again, going back a couple weeks, we look at the justice of God. The justice highlights the beauty of his grace. And God, he has his lines sometimes. He says, enough is enough. I'm going to let you face the consequences of your sins. That's what's happening here. They're tasting the destruction that they really asked for. So friends, as I read this, I think about we need to cleanse ourselves. We need to fully turn back to him. Whatever issue that you're fighting, whatever thing you're wrestling with, we need to turn back fully to him. Like these priests did not do, we need to actually do that. Well, friends, once you fast forward to verse 21, it says this, the last two verses, and again, remember this is an acrostic poem, so every first letter of the verse is the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the last two letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and back here to verse 21, says, rejoice and be glad, daughter of Edom. Rejoice and be glad, daughter of Edom, you who live in the land of Uz. But to you also the cup will be passed. You will be drunk and stripped naked. Jeremiah, what are you talking about? You can tell this is all heart. Poetry coming out through all heart. Well, Edom was a kingdom at odds against Judah. Edom was against them. This other kingdom, they were shown to have like some political neutrality, but they kind of joined sides in some ways with the Babylonians. And now, after the fall of Jerusalem, King Nebuchadnezzar, he gave the rural areas of Judah to the Edomites as a reward for their participation. So they were against Judah. Well, friends, Edom actually means red. And if you look back to the story of Esau, if you remember Jacob and Esau, our hairy friend. That's why I remember him from like Sunday school, just a hairy guy. And he sold his birthright for soup that was red. And later he got the name of Edom, which means red. And so we're seeing the descendants to now here with Edom. Well, in this we move on to verse 22, and it says, your punishment will end, daughter of Zion. He will not prolong your exile, but he will punish your sin, daughter of Edom, and expose your wickedness. So he's saying, okay, Judah, I know the lines, the limits. There will be an ending of the suffering. And I think for us today in 2021, I think we can take this to heart. We look at this, we think, okay, whatever you're going through, there will be an end to that trial. For some of you, it might be after this life. It might be in eternity. That might be the only time you ever face a good day is in eternity. But I look at this, he says, okay, it will end for you, daughter of Zion, but now Edom is coming for you too. God in his wrath, ready to pour out as he has more. He's exposing their wickedness. Well, friends, I don't want to discourage you because, again, I do believe that whatever you're going through will come to an end. Well, friends, again, I just want us to stop. We just went through the heart. We just tasted it. It's like sitting in a counseling session where the person is having this verbal vomit of I'm feeling this and I'm feeling this and this and this. And now we need to narrow this back down. Okay, what is the root? What is the root of this? Well, friends, it's easy to look back and see this and think, well, this is an issue from 2,500 years ago. They had idolatry back then, and they had their weird gold things, and they had all these weird things going on. Well, friends, this really does pertain to us today. Everybody in this room, you could share what your idol is. It might take some searching, some examining. Well, I know for myself, some of you are wondering why this is up here. Well, friends, for myself, I had to look back 2.5 years ago. As this last week, I was trying to think, what was it for me that was an idol? I will honestly say for me, it was running, which for most of you is your biggest nightmare. But for me, it actually took over me. I was 23 when I went for my first jog. I remember thinking, wow, that was fun. A couple blocks, then I got hooked. Had the runner's glow, this high after, and endorphins were kicking in. And I will tell you that I put my heart and soul into running, being an Oregonian and being around the scene, and I love coaching. But it got to the point, I remember being on staff at a church in Oregon. I remember going back in after a 21-miler in the morning with a buddy, and we were going hard. We came in the office, and everybody wanted to talk about it. And then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to know about my races. And I will honestly say I got to the point where I was obsessed with running and training and racing. I loved it. Focused on that next 10K, that next half marathon. It would consume my thoughts. I'm not saying your hobbies are wrong, but it gets to the point it is wrong if the order is out of order. And I tell you, when I come in crawling into the house after a 21-miler, you know something's weird when you make it to the breakfast table and you can't wait for the run tomorrow. You can't wait. And it would consume my thoughts. What if I did this kind of hill sprints? What if I did this? What are the Kenyans doing? It was obsessive for me. It took over me. It was becoming an idol. I remember 2.5 years ago, I had this examination. I searched myself. And I said, God, I don't want to go to my grave and to have it say, Mark McCulloch, birthday, death date, he ran around. I didn't want that to be my title. People were knowing me just as the runner. And so, yes, they knew that I was a Jesus guy, helping coach at the high school. I loved it. I loved talking about training. I loved talking about races. I would follow in all the records and all these things. I loved talking about it. But they knew me as Mark the runner, and he's also a Jesus guy because my order was off. So 2.5 years ago, I remember I just hung it up. And it made my wife more nervous than me because she's only known me as a runner. In the morning, as I was just there in the house, she's like, why are you just standing here? Why are you here? It's just, why are you not out conquering the streets? You know, why are you not out pounding the pavement? Eating hill sprints for breakfast. Well, things changed. And I had a conviction. And I had to search myself and say, no, you know, it's game over. I want to be known as Mark, a follower of Jesus Christ. What other hobby from there would come second place? But I tell you, the order was out for me in so many different ways. Well, friends, I want to remind you, if God is second place in your life, he has no place in your life because he will not take a second seat. He will not take a back seat. He will not take second place for anything, because that's not the God that we serve. Well, friends, we are all made to worship. God has wired us to worship. It is our calling to worship. My wife, years ago, she was leading a worship seminar. I'll never forget this, because she said, you're all wired to have, you're born with a hose, and the hose is always going, and so you can water and spray the hose wherever you want to, but you will worship something. The hose is always going, so where do you aim the hose? What are you cultivating? What is it for you? What consumes your thoughts? As you sit here this morning, maybe your thoughts wander to that idol. Maybe it's wealth. And I tell you, friends, if you are wealthy, it's not just your issue. I have met so many people in poverty that their issue is wealth, trying to achieve what they don't have. Fill in the blanks for yourself. You know what your thing is. Well, friends, we are made to worship. And friends, the question for you this morning is, are you astonished by God? Are you astonished by God? When you wake up, is it hard to think about something else because he consumes your thoughts? Does your spouse have to pull you out of a prayer closet because you're always late for things? Are you astonished by him? Well, friends, I look at our modern evangelical church as we, for maybe 8 seconds right before we eat something, we say this robotic prayer to God, where maybe we drive our car and God is no longer in the backseat. Maybe he's up on a hill somewhere. Every 7 days you go to this hill with your family, you check off the box, and then you leave him there, you get back in your car, you go back, you do your week, and you do this repeating motion over and over. Well, friends, if I was on the outside looking in, that would be a God I would have zero interest in whatsoever. There'd be no captivity. I mean, there would be no captivation. There would be no astonishment. I would say, well, there's no way I wanted to follow this God. If I were to look at us as the church today, we need to be astonished by God. We've lost this in the church. The astonishment of thinking who he is in his attributes, who he is in his nature, what he's done for us, even what he hasn't done for us, just because of looking at him for who he is and being astonished because he's God and we're dots on a ball. That's the order. Well, friends, I know you all know a person who looks uncomfortable when they're not talking about Jesus. You think of that person in your life? I'm sure we can all think of that person. The person where, they try to talk about the weather or sports, they just seem uncomfortable, and then they go back to that default of, let's talk about what Jesus has done for me. Let's talk about how he answered prayer. You know those people? Be that person. Be that person. You're thinking when to start? Now. There's a world out there waiting, a world that we should weep over, that is waiting for us to be astonished by him. But we have to get the order right. He has to be Lord of our life. Because friends, if God is second place in your life, he has no place in your life. Well, friends, as we wrap this up, I want to remind you in this context, as we look forward, 500 years later, out of the ashes of Judah, in the lineage, there would be a lion that would rise up, and beauty would come from ashes. And his name is Jesus, and he's a Messiah. And he came to earth as a Savior to save us, to pave a way for forgiveness. And the season we get ready for Christmas, I love it because we get to focus on this truth, is that someday, he promises you that someday he will wipe away every tear and eliminate suffering. That's his drive. And that is eternity with him. Friends, on this earth, Sammy said it well earlier on, we will have trials, we will have suffering as part of being a Christ follower. But he promises us in eternity that there will be no more tears and no more suffering. Friends, be astonished by him. So friends, question again for you is this: what is your idol? What consumes your thoughts? What for you, if you lost it today, you would question your will to live? Now, parents, I have to think this with our kids. There's a level of love with our daughters. It could get to a point of idolatry. Maybe that sounds weird to you, but I'm being serious. When I come home, goosebump galore come in, they want to show me everything they've done. I think about them often. I pray for them. My mind is blown I can be their dad. I love being with them. I love cuddling. But then I think about Abraham and Isaac. Do I have that much faith to lift a knife because I believe it's not about this, everything here, it's about him. He reigns in my life. I don't know if I have enough faith. What is it for you that you obsess over? Well, friends, I want to give you a chance this morning to reflect on that. I want to pray for you. And friends, if you've never given your life to Christ, if you've never received him, if he's not Lord over your life, if he has a back seat, or if he is far up on a hill, this morning I want to invite you to come back and pray with some elders, and I'll be back in the back. I would love to pray with you, that we can actually go into the Christmas season understanding who Jesus is, and let's be astonished by him. Let's be astonished by him, because he needs to be first in our life. Well, friends, let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you so much, God. God, I am astonished by you. Forgive me for the times I'm not astonished by you. Forgive me for the times where I put so many things above you. God, all these things from hobbies. We all have a long list, God. Materialism, popularity, those comments, those likes, whatever it is, God, that we search for. God, forgive us. Forgive me for pursuing other things other than you first. So God, I lift up everyone in this room, every one of our friends online, that you help them get their priorities figured out. God, we want to leave here today being astonished by you. We want to show the world that you are first. We want to struggle and stop talking about you. So God, renew us. Have your Holy Spirit light a new fire in us this season as there's a dying world out there. So Jesus, if there's anyone here who's never said yes to you, God, give them a pull this morning to say yes to you and to believe in you, the truth that you are, the good news, the gospel. And Jesus, I pray this in your name.